Gentlemen, I would like to call this meeting for Emergency and Community Services to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live on the website. Other
Hamilton Community Legal Clinic added as item 4.2 is a delegation request submitted by
Councillor Johnson, seconded by Johnson. Meeting. Mr. Craig Foy of the Offerson and Medora Hamilton Veterans Committee. These are as follows. All those in favor of a report. Social and cultural Geneva. Mr. Foy, if you could please, the floor is yours.
To this committee, Committee on Economic an adequate standard of living in Hamilton, and specifically with regard to the non-realization of that right in not only Hamilton but in many communities across Canada. At that time, the Hamilton City Council approved and supported that report, and wrote to the Secretary of the United Nations Committee endorsing the report. You may know, or if you've had a chance to look at my report, then 2006 had many very critical comments with regard to Canada, and particularly this was similar to their concluding observations also in 1998. I appear in front of you today to say that unfortunately communities, particularly for those in our community who are living in cultural rights. I know my time is limited in this committee as consider writing a report like this. I think something that's very staff lawyer at a community legal clinic often benefits. It's hard enough for those who are working on some type of enter into a repayment agreement with their landlord when appear to anywhere near average market and so what that means for the future of our community. If you talk to anyone from this of our community, also with regard to health levels, currently we're seeing shelters need in our community, and we know that about 5% of those people our future in our with regard to all of these issues on about it. But I do appear to you today with a couple of again in follow-up report in Winnipeg. And we're asking that the City of Hamilton also start to do some work in this regard to see what that would mean, what would be involved with us becoming a human rights city. I thank you very much for your time, and I hope I haven't taken too much of it.
Mr. Foy, that's quite appropriate, and it was a fantastic presentation. Thank you for the work that you've been doing over the last decade. We do have a speakers list, so I'm sure people have been listening with interest. Up first, we have Councillor Johnson, followed by Councillor Marula and any other councillors who might have questions.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and through you very briefly. Thank you very much for this report, and I'd be happy to move. I believe we require a motion to endorse. So at the appropriate time, I'm happy to move that motion. And to research proposes Councillor. And I'm happy to put that in the motion too, if that's clear. As you finish, that it's sad that 10 years later, from my work for legal aid, how deep and good the work is that Hamilton Community Legal Services does for low-income people in the city. So You referred in your presentation to your work as a duty council, and on my own behalf, I'm sure I speak for my colleagues. I just want to say thank you very much. You do tremendous work, and your organization does also. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your kind words, Councillor Johnson. It means a lot. Thank you.
We have Councillor Marula.
Thank you. And welcome, Craig, once again. And I can say that 10 years ago, I heard the first presentation, and I'm hearing it again today. And I must say that I'm a little disillusioned by the fact that the indicator, considering how much effort this council, in the face of provincial and federal issues that contribute to a lot of our challenges, and how we've come to the plate as a council, that in itself hasn't in some way mitigated some of the challenges that we're faced with. Having said that, through you, Mr. Chairman, if we were to focus in on what needs to be done, who needs to do what would that list be at present with respect to at least recognizing the presenting problem so we can look forward a more concrete plan of action? Because I really did feel that this council has a concrete plan. We set up a number of poverty reduction initiatives, reached out to the community, not only investment, financially in the community, and so what needs to occur, and how can the province and the federal government come to place to make it more progressive as opposed to the progressive challenges that we're faced with on a daily basis.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Marula. Question. I think first off, I should say that it's not all bad news, and I think I did allude to that earlier on. There have been some improvements, and really, when you look at the areas where there were improvements, excuse me, it shows where the priorities have lay. So, for instance, with regard to minimum wage, we have seen significant improvements. Excuse me. Where the government has decided to raise minimum wage, well, I believe when you're accounting for inflation, they've raised it about 33% since 2006, which is a very significant increase. Where we've seen a huge lack of action, and this isn't at say, there are an enormous number of people who are working very hard. Community, that is the most critical issue to be dealt with. Currently, those are falling below subsistence levels, and so, as I said, I don't want to harp on it, but really, what does that mean for the future of our community? Right now, we have provincial social assistance rates aren't based on any evidence. They're just arbitrary numbers that are politically determined by kind of the winds of political change. Nobody actually sits down and says, well, what do we need to pay people on provincial social assistance so they're not evicted all of the time, so that they can afford to buy food, so that they can afford to buy clothes? And so that's one of the things that we've worked very hard on at the Hamilton Community Legal Clinic, going so far as drafting legislation in 2007, which was introduced as a private member's bill and has never come back up in the legislature, to create an expert panel that would determine evidence-based social assistance rates on a regular basis. And if you're asking me what really needs to be done, Councillor Marula, for me that is ground zero. That's the first thing that has to happen, is evidence-based social assistance rates.
And to expand upon that, I know throughout my tenure, even prior to being on council and working with some of the most marginalized people in our community, the ODSP criteria for acceptance was amended in and around 1995, which sent who suddenly who would have been, everyone recognizes facts locally to address it, to reverse it. It's really a, from your perspective, reverse that.
So I wasn't at the clinic referring to is they got rid of an old category that could be found who weren't, they didn't find disability or
points, Councillor Maroon. We have Councillor Whitehead on the first time.
For the time, I believe. That has that meeting
through amalgamation. We were
great. So I think that the survey as well, and on the funding, provincial legislation, to some degree even federal. So if we stand up and take a particular position, knowing full well, I'd rather see this whole thing about human rights city. I'd rather see a human rights province, because really they control this, and that may put more of a greater burden on
our province through the lens of international human rights law. And we're making provincially, voting federally, we are making those decisions and viewing those issues through with the aid of the lens of international human rights law. So, Councillor Whitehead, I'm sorry, I can't say that there wouldn't be implications for the citizens of Hamilton, but I would suggest and recommend positive implications for the city, although I cannot guarantee that there wouldn't be some financial implications. Yeah. Of course.
Yeah, I guess that's where, so from the perspective of right to adequate living house, standard of living, I mean, I'm absolutely on side for that. I guess my challenge is that I don't want to box the city taxpayers into a situation on any form where literally we will be holding this community directly accountable to these actions, knowing full well that we don't have the financial capacity to deliver, and the only place we can go to is the property taxpayers in this community. That concerns me, because that means that there'll be a greater level of pressure, and we already know that there's affordability issues within our community now, people barely hanging on to their homes. So I guess my concern spell out clearly that this is in context or in conjunction with or in partnership with the federal and provincial government. It's just the city of Hamilton. I just don't want to expose the taxpayers a greater burden than they can afford in this community without those partnerships in place. So I'm just trying to understand how we create a charter that ensures that we're not putting a greater burden on the taxpayers in this community.
I'm sorry, I'm not prepared where I would be able to give a fulsome answer to that, to your comments and your questions, Councillor Whitehead. I think at this stage, really what we were asking is that staff at the city begin to look at the possibility of council voting to become a human rights city, and what those implications would be and what the possibilities would be in that regard. And
so I want to make clear that on the principle I agree with. Yes. On both fronts. Again, it really boils down to how we implement it and what is the implications to the city of Hamilton and the taxpayer of this community. I think that report through the due diligence would be identified, and we'll have a clear picture of what that could be. So I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Whitehead.
I do have myself on the first-time speakers list, but I'll defer to any other first-time speakers who might want to comment. Being none, I'll pass the chair over to Councillor Johnson.
Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Just a couple of comments through you, Mr. Chair. Summarizing the presentation as I understand it, hopefully building on the last set of questions that came here, and then I'm going to ask for some of your comments. So you'll know that at this council, we're working currently on payday loans and unpacking the complexity of what that means in terms of implications on our community. You'll also know that we're looking at regulating what I consider to be a substandard, inadequate housing market, which is putting people in very vulnerable situations. You'll hear today about the McQueston farm that's being presented as a food security, a very practical food security mention, and you'll also hear about our work around trying to finally nail down this living wage. So those are some what appears to me to be some very practical things addressing some of these issues that you've brought forward today to re-sign on to. But I want to touch back on the 30,000 people that we have here that are basically working poor, living in an unlivable wage community. I want to touch on what you've deemed you correctly identify as our social assistance program, where we're basically legislating poverty by having people living under the LICO through our own policy. So I'm wondering if you can just elaborate on how we can best organize as a community and perhaps across the province, if this is being carried out in other municipalities, to really go back to that social assistance review that happened a few years back and to really hammer down on the cost of poverty as it relates to our social assistance now.
Yes. I won't say, thank you very much for your question, Mr. Chair. It has been done to some extent in that the Canadian Association of Food Banks has actually written a report about 4 or 5 years ago called The Cost of Poverty, where they have estimated really just billions of dollars in lost monies and in actual costs with regard to poverty, including kind of health costs and all kinds of opportunity costs in our community. So there has been work done on these issues. Similarly, from the side of the improvements that could be made by actually paying subsistence level incomes on social assistance, myself and Professor Atif Kabersi appeared in front of council, about 6 or 7 years ago now, I think, with a report of Dr. Kabersi's called The Economic Impact of Social Assistance in Hamilton, where he looked at how a raise of $100 for each single in Hamilton, how that would affect the Hamilton economy. And what you find is that when you're raising incomes for people who are on social assistance and are below subsistence levels, then the money multiplier is huge. For the economic analysis there. So what that means is that every single dollar that you're spending is going directly into the local economy, right? So people aren't going to Florida or buying a boat or anything like that. They're spending their money in the local community, and you're not actually paying for additional resources to deliver that money. You're actually it is the most efficient economic stimulus that you can have, and this has been recognized more recently by as August institutions as the World Bank is finally coming around and recognizing that this is the most effective impact you could have. What I think we could do as a city, and this harkens back, I think, to Councillor Whitehead's worries about the kind of these human rights issues and becoming a human rights city. I think we have to go to the province, but I think we have to continually go to the province. They hear it periodically from us that there needs to be evidence-based social assistance rates, but I think what's got to happen is it's just got to become an endless refrain where we just hammer at them for evidence-based social assistance rates until that day when it finally happens.
I'll thank you for the fulsome of that answer. Through you, Mr. Chair, I think it's important to highlight that when we had our day at Queen's Park, I can tell you with the previous chair, Councillor Whitehead and I, we had a chance to meet with the Honourable Jacek, along with Joanne and some of our staff members, and we brought this topic up. And unfortunately, what I took away from it is that it's not a sexy topic. It's not a politically sexy topic where around the cabinet, you know, they are itching to go out and spend more money on social assistance. And yet, the economic impacts through you, Mr. Chair, that I'm sure Professor Kabersi would attest to is the costs of what I consider to be kind of the continuum of fundamental health care. So starting with things like housing, food, and clothing, as you've identified in this, but also education, employment, and crime. And with the increasing costs of policing and what it means to incarcerate people, I always wondered how, you know, it trickles back down through that continuum. And we're seeing the shift towards a housing first policy here. And you know that we are, as a municipality, trying to tackle substandard housing as it exists in our market, But on the issue of evidence-based policy, you've identified your work, and I can tell you in Ward 3 that we do a lot of that same work in tenant organizing and supports. Do you have data on the trends of N12s, N4s, and L1s as it pertains to evictions? Are we tracking that data to show the cost of gentrification, the raising costs of cost of living, as it relates to the stagnant costs of what I'll call legislated poverty and unlivable wages?
So, to the first part of your question, Councillor Green, with regard to the landlord board, the statistics that I use in the report you'll see are from the most recent annual report of the Social Justice Tribunals of Ontario, of which the Landlord Tenant Board is part of that tribunal cluster. Unfortunately, it has been our experience, and this goes back to back when I worked with the Social Planning and Research Council many years ago with Suzanne Brown, I see, who's here, was my boss at the Social Planning and Research Council back in 2000. And I know Suzanne will recall that back then we were trying to get statistics from what was then the Ontario Rental Housing Tribunal, and they just don't produce the kind of statistics that you would want to see. So so the answer to that question is no, we're getting kind of global numbers on the number of L1 applications. One of the things that the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights Committee is asking is they would like to know when they're being evicted, and there's no research being done on that right now. And I'm sorry, Councillor Green, if you could remind me to kind of the second part of your question. I wasn't entirely clear.
No, it's a first start. What I'm trying to do in my head, talking about evidence-based policy, building a case for adequate social assistance, living wage, is that we're trying to track here in Hamilton. I know when I personally started the work probably 4 years ago with Tom Cooper, at that time it was $14.95. And in a very short period of time here in Hamilton, with the rising costs of real estate, that number has evaporated. We're now having to rejig all of our numbers and figure out what that number is. And so I had a hunch, a gut feeling, that what we would find in our trends of stagnated social assistance and wages, increased cost of living, is an increased number of people who are being evicted. So the N12s, the N4s, and the L1s, the forms that I hear about in my office, it feels like to me somewhere in our justice system in Hamilton we can track how many of those have been filed. I would love to know that number over the last 5 years. I would also love to get your professional opinion as to how much percentage-wise do you think are there people out there in the community who are served these notices and leave with into the tenant board? Because it's been my experience, the vast majority of residents and tenants that receive these notices, they just go away quietly, so we can't even begin to track them. Is there a mechanism in place that when you're served an N4, an N12, an L1 that you have to file it, or is it practice to just serve it and not file it? Well,
I mean, certainly there are cases where we see where a notice is served on someone and no application is filed. Sometimes, as you say, Councillor Green, that's because the tenants leave after being served a notice, and that's worrying for us at the Hamilton Community Legal Clinic if they're not getting proper legal advice before they're doing so. And there are cases also where just the landlord perhaps doesn't follow up because sometimes those notices really are baseless, and the landlord will know at the outset that it's baseless, or they subsequently get some legal advice and find out that they're not going to be successful on an application to the Landlord Tenant Board. The type of analysis and research that you're suggesting, Councillor Green, I think would be a wonderful project. Would have to be in, as you know, in partnership with the province, and you would have to work closely with the Landlord Tenant Board in order to determine that. We did do something similar over 10 years ago in Hamilton, going back over a dozen years. We had something called the Early Intervention Project a number of years ago. That was back when the former Ontario Rental Housing Tribunal used to have something called default evictions. And so we had an early intervention project where we were getting tenant lists and contacting tenants after an application had been filed to make sure that they knew that they had to respond or face a default eviction. And through that, for a window of time, we had some very good research on the numbers in Hamilton, but unfortunately we don't have those numbers anymore.
And I appreciate the being candid about that. I think that it's an opportunity for us that when we're really trying to humanize the issues, that we can provide what we have. So I guess in that space, the last question I want to ask before, last two questions I want to ask before wrapping it up. Would you not agree that as a municipality, one of the places where we can have an intervention in providing adequate housing is to look at ways where we can regulate a market and basically demand a certain standard of living for people that are pressured into these kind of substandard situations, particularly around fire and building code?
Sorry, if I'm understanding, Councillor Green, you're talking about kind of enforcement of public health and property standards and fire department standards?
Yeah, I'm talking about as a municipality within our scope. I know we had heard earlier comments here, and I know Councillor Whitehead has spent some time on this file. Councillor Johnson's on this file as well, as it relates to rental licensing or rental registration possibilities. Yes. Things that as a municipality we can ensure that we are creating a safe environment for people to live in vis-a-vis particularly fire. We've had a few of those in the last couple of months, yes. But also as it relates to code. I won't get into planning in terms of density, but yes. Particularly with those two issues. Is that not something that we can do to follow through on this request at a very practical level, yes. To ensure people have an adequate place to live?
Yes, I mean, the short answer, Councillor Green, from the Hamilton Community Legal Clinic perspective is yes. We were in the past supportive of landlord licensing when it came in front of council a couple of years ago, and I can tell you, kind of again anecdotally, over the kind of work that I'm doing, and I know all councillors will be seeing this in their offices too. There are things that could be done to make it more efficient for tenants to be able to enforce property standards issues and public health issues against their landlord. I know that sometimes tenants are having trouble, and I know you'll get. We're often referring them to the councillors if they're not getting kind of the answers that they need from the city. So I know you're getting a lot of those calls when people haven't had an inspector actually put reports in a very efficient way with regard to their unit. Of a lawyer and looking, if you make it easier for people to know about whether their landlord is meeting their obligations with regard to the property code, then you will have more actually standing up for their rights, in that evidence to force their landlord to come.
You've brought something that I think, or even on today's topics, the word perhaps a friendly amendment to Article 11. It reads, the state's part to everyone to an adequate of living for himself and his family. Expression, I think, today's standard of human rights. Yeah. So that will be the amendment that I put, that when you go back to the UN, you ask them to take away himself and his and replace it with their to include orientation and gender.
I definitely agree with the thrust of that amendment, Councillor Green. I would note that I'm not actually going back to the UN this time. We'll just be reporting to them in writing this time.
Can you please ensure that that's put in writing through an amendment as supported by our motion coming up here? Is that okay?
Certainly, yes, yeah, absolutely.
Those are my questions, Councillor Johnson. Is there anybody on the speakers list?
Yes, there's Councillor Marula. And I believe I'm on the list too for my motion.
You are actually the first on the second time speakers list, followed by Councillor Marula. My apologies.
Thank you very much. So I'll give the chair back to you. And unless anyone has any concerns, I'll bring forward my motion.
We still have the speakers list, so
okay,
if
we'll
you have something to add, if you have something to add, feel free to do that. If you don't, then we'll defer to Councillor Marula, and then you can bring your motion at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think going along the same lines with respect to who does what, who pays for what, and where the focus should be, I think it's important that we use this as an opportunity and a tool. I think the federal and provincial governments, with respect to the regressive nature of the present taxation system in Hamilton, Ontario, and in Canada, and I think on an international level, we may actually get more attention than we're actually receiving from a local perspective. We've been very vocal along this front, but we've seen some movement. But even in today's agenda, you'll see the SAMS program, another example of a downloaded program that's essential. So if we can, and I'd like an amendment accordingly within this, that the actual issue surrounding the downloading, the fact that for every dollar in taxes that we pay, 90 cents of that dollar goes to the federal and provincial government. 10 cents of it comes to the municipality. This has all been concurred with by FCM. And in that 10 cents, 50% of that, or 5 cents of that, is as a result of downloading, which compounds our problem, where that we don't control half of our operating budget. After all of these years of talking about the average person in Hamilton, I believe in Ontario, does not recognize that we're the only country in the entire Western Democratic Hemisphere that has housing and social assistance on the backs of a residential taxpayer. It's certain. And the only way we're going to perhaps have the federal government wake up to this and the provincial government is to shame them internationally, because it shouldn't be occurring, and we need it reversed as quickly as possible. So if I could, to you, Mr. Chairman, move an amendment to this, that in conjunction with our staff, and Joanne is very aware of this issue, and so is Mike Zagarek, that in consultation with our management, that it is incorporated in the presentation to the United Nations reporting.
Do you have particular language that you want to
staff will work with Mike Zagarek and Joanne will work with you to draft the language specifically related to the regressive form of taxation that we presently are exposed to. And that's seconded by Jackson.
We're clear on all of that, so that's we're going to have your motion first, and then go back to Aiden's.
And amendment.
So, Councillor Johnson, you've heard the amendment as stated. Did you get that in? Maybe can we just run through that one more time, Councillor Marula, just to refresh everybody?
So, move on myself, seconded by Councillor Johnson, that staff be directed to work in conjunction. Well, the first part is to endorse it. The second part, B, would be that staff be directed to work accordingly with the community legal group in establishing the wording to address the issue of the regressive nature of taxation in Ontario and in Canada as it pertains to the downloading the file and the regressive nature accordingly. So the first part would be council endorsement. That council endorsed the HICLC fall report to the United Nations Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. That the appropriate staff be requested to research feasibility of council becoming a human rights city, and that B, as I mentioned earlier. Jenny, is that all good with you? Yeah. All right.
As well as a change of his and himself to there.
Right.
May I just say something quickly in response? Just I should note that I don't disagree with the issues that you're bringing up at all, Councillor Marilla, but I should note that none of those issues are actually addressed in the report that we're sending to the United Nations. So they might be a little bit confused to get kind of a cover endorsement that actually that raises issues that aren't addressed in the report. And secondly, I should say I'm far from an expert on those taxation issues. And while I agree with everything that you're saying, if you're looking for an expert to work with staff to develop wording for that, unfortunately, I probably would not be that person.
We have the
okay.
Mike Zagarek and Joanne are the experts on this file.
Wonderful, thank you.
And they'll put that wording together accordingly.
That's moved by yourself, seconded by Councillor Johnson. All those in favor? Carried. Mr. Foy, I appreciate you coming to the committee today and certainly appreciate the work that you're doing.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Excellent. So may I please have a motion to receive the presentation? Moved by Councillor Farr, seconded by Councillor Whitehead. All those in favor? Carried. We're now on to Ms. Denise Christopherson and Medora Uppal of the YWCA Hamilton regarding the YWCA's Transitional Living Program for Women. Yes, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Great to see everyone. My name is Denise Christopherson. I'm the CEO, and I'm happy to be here with our Director of Operations, Medora Opal. I'm just going to give a short overview, and then Medora is going to go through the PowerPoint presentation that I believe you all have a copy of. And so just at a high level, I've now been the CEO at YWCA Hamilton for just over 5 years. Within the first year that I was at the YWCA, I had noticed the model of housing. YWCA Hamilton has been in some form of housing for over 126 years, but the model that we took on was a few years prior to me starting was the transitional living model, because what we were seeing is more and more women who had nowhere else to go outside of a shelter system needed an opportunity to heal, receive services and support so that they could move on into independent living. At that time, the YWCA was receiving under $40,000 in support. And within the first year, too, what we saw were a number of women connected with the YWCA Transitional Living Program were actually dying in the community. And in one case, within that first year, a woman had checked herself out of psychiatric supports at St. Joe's, came back to the YWCA, and unfortunately wasn't getting the supports that she needed to heal, and actually committed suicide. It was from that point in time when I started attending meetings, and it was the staff at the City of Hamilton, and I remember the meeting distinctly. I met with Jillian Hendry and her team when I asked them what specifically they could do to assist the YWCA because women were dying. And so through Joanne Prail's leadership and the entire team in housing, they have continued to work with YWCA over the years to try to find solutions. I have to say at a high level, so have every one of the individual counselors sitting around this table have met with the YWCA, and for that I thank you. I know the challenges that you're facing, particularly during budget times and how funds are allocated through different levels of government. I want to assure Council that I have been doing everything that I can as the CEO of YWCA Hamilton to advocate for additional funds coming to the municipal level. At both the provincial and federal levels, I've participated in pre-budget hearings, and I continue to do that. The reason we're here today is that we had an ask to City Council for additional funding. I understand that staff's reports coming back indicating that there are no funds to support, but we just wanted to be able to provide you with an update of what we're doing with the investment that you're currently giving us, and just to say very pointedly that we need additional supports for the work that we're doing. I'm going to let Medora go through just to give you the update on sort of the current state of affairs, and then we'll be open for any questions.
So thank you, councillors. So each year over 100 women enter the transitional living program. Sometimes over 150 women we see come through our doors. And each of them are experiencing homelessness, they're precariously housed, and unfortunately have multiple barriers to accessing affordable housing and services and stability in their life. So the issue around supporting them is very complex and individualized. So by we saw $305,000 being into YWCA transitional year, so it gets all mixed up. So slide, and the reason for the backslide was funding based on a limited amount receiving only $200. Why that's important is because that $305,000 investment that we were seeing was a minimum amount for us to have 24/7 staffing. So I said about 100 to 150 women are coming through our doors. At any given time, it's 65. We have 65 units at the YWCA and 55 women with complex issues, including trauma, violence, and histories of poverty, is absolutely unacceptable. It's a risk the city shouldn't take. It's a risk the YWCA should not take, nor our staff, nor the women living in the program. So we said we must have at least 2 staff on 24/7 in order to operate. That's what $305,000 did for us at that time. So now we're facing $251,000 again coming into April. We've worked with the staff with Jillian Hendry and her team to receive an additional $60,000 from the 2015 fund that helped us. We still are and continue to be fundraising in order to meet our shortfall for this fiscal year. What we're talking to you about today is not that shortfall, but it is the April 1st shortfall we will face and the pressure it puts on our program to keep our doors open. So just to give you some context, it's hard to compare apples to apples. There isn't another transitional living program like ours in the city, so in comparison to a shelter, an emergency shelter model, you might see, and you do see in one shelter, 109 per bed for 20 beds. From the funding we receive from the city, in combination with contributions directly from Ontario Works through each woman's income, we see $22.94 a day, supporting 65 beds. That doesn't include meals. We've built a social enterprise, a catering business called At the Table, to offer supports for meal provision and contribute to fundraising and donations, because we know we can't always come to government for everything we need for this program, that we do need to go into the private sector, and we also need to develop our own ways of creating sustainable funding. So that's what we're doing with the social enterprise. So right now, the pressure point is an additional $125,000 annually in order to maintain the minimum service levels we have now. Again, that's 24/7 hours a day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 2 staff on. That's it. Nothing more. It's a minimum. $125,000 is what we need to see. We've applied for additional grants. We've gone to private foundations. We have applied to the Enrichment Fund through the City of Hamilton for an extra investment. They traditionally give us $19,000 a year. With the new funding proposal process, we've asked for $75,000 for 2016. So we're still waiting to hear about that, and that would go towards contributing to the $125,000 shortfall we're facing. Denise mentioned the advocacy work she does, and I do, and we both do together, meeting with provincial and federal levels of government, with politicians, with bureaucrats. We go right down to Toronto and meet with them. And also we connect and coordinate through YWCA across the country. So our national office, YWCA Canada, is advocating on this issue, and we coordinate with other local YWCAs who share similar issues and challenges in their communities to come up with strategies. And then locally, I've mentioned WIPIC again, and we're really in deep planning with WIPIC, which includes city staff, in order to come up with the best and most effective strategies with the limited resources we have in this community, and really think not just about what we need today, but a long-term plan to address the issues of housing and homelessness. So we thank you for the support that you've given so far to our program. We're saying to you that we're not done. We have to keep having this conversation with you. It would be wrong for us to step aside. We want you to know that we had the conversation with private sector. We had in 2015 the addition of investment from Brant Haven, that updated our living quarters for the women in residence.
Medora, good to see you, and you know, I just served as vice president of your board for many years, and I've been a huge supporter of the YWCA, and you certainly, you know, of the agencies that work incredibly hard across our city, you're numbered right up at the top there. A couple of questions just to clarify, if I may. When you mentioned partners that you have, other than the city, who are the other partners? And where I'm going with this through you, Mr. Chair, if I could just clarify, what I'm looking for is you mentioned that many of the women that you deal with are very high needs, and they need that transitional help to be able to integrate back into their own living place in our city. So if you could just touch on the programs and the partners that you're working with, or is that work done 100% by the YWCA?
No, we absolutely have to do this in partnership. So we have Good Shepherd Women's Services is providing supports. There's a couple of projects we've worked with together. One is SOS, which is the Housing First initiative. So they're coming in and supporting women eligible for Housing First. We also are working together on a rapid housing project that was recently funded through a one-time call for proposals. And we also have Womankind involved, so that provides the substance use supports, withdrawal management supports, as well as homelessness beds, and we work in collaboration there. The City of Hamilton through the street outreach program, workers coming in. So, and Ontario Works, we have a dedicated Ontario Works worker working with women to help us expedite their ability to move in as well as their ability to move out and manage ongoing challenges with income levels. So the list goes on, but those are our major partners.
Okay, and through you, Mr. Chair, thank you so much. That is a very good, fulsome answer. And I really wanted to, for the benefit of those in the audience and anybody watching, to get a further, breadth of the partners that you work with, but also the work that's being done for the women, because it's absolutely critical. Another question for you. When you mentioned your focus is on the transitional housing model or living model, and that you're the only one in the city.
We're the only one of the size. So
you need in that the sheer number of women
yes.
that you do provide transitional housing for and assistance.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, because the other organizations, they're, smaller in nature.
They're smaller, or they're providing housing in terms of second stage through scattered units across the city. So it doesn't have the same implication when you're housing 65 women in one space versus apartments and townhouses across the city in a entirely different type of model.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I appreciate that clarification.
One of the things we've been able to do, because again of the lack of funding and investment, is that because of the other services that YWCA offers, we're able to provide those additional supports to women. Things like employment and skills development. We have a resource center, so women are able to access the resource center and computers. We have, health and wellness programs and services, so the women who access our services have access to health and wellness. And as we said, the social enterprise. So we try to utilize what we already have in place to provide additional supports to women, but we get no additional supports for that. But we try to make sure that we are offering everything we can so that women are able to move on as quickly as possible, as soon as they are ready. Probably one of the biggest deficits, there are many deficits, but the issues of mental health are huge. And, there probably isn't a council who hasn't heard that across this country. But again, community supports for mental health are virtually non-existent. And so women who come into our service, who are into our programs, although we may want to provide supports, we do the best we can, but the fact that, there isn't a lot to refer people to, or that people are waiting months and months and months to access a service, that sometimes holds women back. So every community across this country is having those issues.
And I thank you very much for raising that, Mr. Chair, because that certainly is one area that I was going to tease out. And so you've given a good explanation of that as well. Just to clarify, though, the programs and services that you run, they're not just for the women that are housed in the transitional living quarters at the YWCA. It's my understanding that it is more encompassing than that. So can you expand on that, please?
Sorry, say that again, Judy?
So there's more, those services and programs are open to others other than the ones that are being housed at the YWCA. Is that correct?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
And so, yeah, we run any number of programs that, citizens can access from across the community. But again, part of it is not to just run individualized programs for homeless women. We want women to be able to integrate into all of our programs and services. At the end of the day, the goal is for women to integrate back into the community so they are self-sufficient. They're in their own safe space for living. And we hope that even after that, they'll be able to access their programs and services.
So is it correct to say it's like a wraparound program?
Yes.
Wrapping around women and being able to help them. Okay.
Again, if you can go to the slide, that first bullet, city shelter, 109 per bed per day at 20 beds, and then the second bullet is 2294 per bed per day. Is this slide telling us, through you, Chair, that if we don't address the 2294 second bullet, we're going to see an increase in the 109 per bed per day statistic? You didn't really come right out and say it, but since they're together, I'm assuming that's the point that you're trying to drive at, Medora?
Well, we've known that the 20-bed Mary's Place, which was a 20-bed shelter, has grown into needing to have additional shelter space. That we had to, we recommended as WIPIC and to the city that there be expanded shelter supports available. So Native Women's Center has opened Mountain View as a temporary shelter to accommodate. So yeah, the pressures, when we don't have the investment to do the work we do, it's very hard for us to open up space to women who are in shelters. It's also very hard for us to move women out more quickly, successfully, which is why we have our rapid housing program in coordination with Good Shepherd to try to move women along a little faster out and into success. We're not trying to move women into failure. We want to move them into success. That takes some investment. So yes, it would create more pressure on that $109 bed without some more investment in the YWCA's program.
And how is that program going, Medora, the moving of the women out quickly into successful scenarios?
We have a lot of success stories and we have a lot of challenges. We continue to see women around 6 months is about the average length of stay, but then we have those who are much longer than that. There is a lack of affordable housing out in the community, but it's more complex than that because it's really, Denise alluded to the mental health challenges and substance use challenges a number of the women are facing, along with the violence they've experienced. I'd like to say we are moving everyone out within a 6 month. Really, it takes a lot longer than that. We have some women who've been with us for quite a few years.
Okay, and then you shared the evolution of municipal funding. I think it was Denise, was it you that said 10 years ago you were receiving from this municipality $40,000 in support? Was that right?
Yes.
Yeah, it was actually $18,000, and the other funding was from United Way. We continue to receive United Way, but it's a very small component. It was at that time $40,000. It's less than that now, as they've had to cut year over year, and we are. We hope not to have any more cuts, but that will depend on what United Way announces in February.
And just so I'm clear, 10 years later, here we are. Is the full operational component, Medora, $305K, and is that from various sources? Is it the $305K annually that is now $251 municipal?
That's through provincial and federal combined funding that's distributed through the municipality. So it's CHIPE funding and HPS funding combined. Our other sources of funding would be the program revenue. Women pay a program fee because they get their full ODSP allotment when they are with us, whereas they don't when they're in shelter. And then a small amount from United Way, a small amount from the City Enrichment Fund, and then other donations.
And you said, so I'm sure, so on this 251, the need before us today from your delegation is another 125, so roughly 400K.
Yes.
To maintain this operation as it exists now.
As it exists now.
Okay, and 75 of that 125 through you, Chair, sorry, City Enrichment Fund. So you already received funding from City Enrichment Fund, is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, we had our last, we've reapplied. We had 3 years committed at $19,000 a year, roughly 19,000. And we've asked, because of this gap in funding, that for 2016 at least, we see an increase to 75,000.
On a 3-year, another 3-year?
I'm not sure what their decision will be, but, or how that would work. Okay. We would hope for 3 years, but.
Okay, I'm the chairman, I know, and others around this table sit on that committee. So which envelope do you apply under through the City Enrichment Fund? For you, Chair.
Good question, because there's two. There's two, and I can't think of the titles right now, because we have 2 applications and one for another program.
So let's say you're successful, hypothetically, through you, Chair, the other 75 then would be municipally funded. Get you to your...
Yes.
Oh, sorry, not 75,
no.
but 50.
50, yeah, but we would be asking for another 50, yeah.
So if all goes well, this delegation today is about requesting a 50K increase municipally from that municipal envelope, save and except for the enrichment fund through you, Chair.
That would be correct, yeah.
We have Councillor Johnson.
Thanks very much, Councillor Green. Councillors Partridge and Farr have covered a lot of the questions that I wanted to ask. So I'm probably just going to limit myself to some short comments rather than questions. Through you to Denise, last year at the Y Junction dinner, you used a line in your speech that has haunted me and that has come back to me a lot ever since. You said, we're told to do more with less, but the message is we can do more with more. And how can I put this? It had a ring to it, and it comes back to me. I don't know if we have the money that you need this year. I'm hopeful that we do. We'll see. The thing that I want to say, kind of in a factual way, is this. Over the past several weeks, I've been doing a lot of research into the resources that are available in Hamilton for the transition past several weeks and months, that the YWCA is a kind of shining light on a report and say publicly that that's come to my attention in a powerful way, and I wanted to say thank you.
Already been taken under advisement by staff as a budget submission, and Mr. Chairman, through you to General Manager Priel, please.
Would it might just
Okay, you want me to save it for staff after?
Well, I'm hoping that we can all have a conversation with staff. I just know receive them, then we talk to staff, and then we around the table. If you
put me on your speakers list for staff. Thanks, Denise. Thanks, Medora.
Rise. Shelters are getting 100.
The Director of Housing Services would need to answer that.
Although the amount an empty bed there.
Okay.
A day, $54 a day.
So this is just.
If we could,
Mr. Chair, once you put it on the chart and make it part of the presentation, it's fair game to ask questions on it. I would assume.
Sure. No, I would happily accept any questions to the delegates, and then we can receive the delegation and then open it up to staff. Just to be fair to Councillor Jackson, who I've just shut down a few moments ago.
Okay. So can I ask? What is your average turnover rate? So when you talk about it is transitional housing, you got 65 beds that are, I guess, are all being used. What is the average length of stay in your transitional housing?
So average last we calculated was 6 months.
And is that the target, 6 months?
It's we give 11 months. That's the sort of our maximum we try to work towards.
Can I, because I'm not an expert in transitional housing, is there best practices in regards to what is the actual number that is acceptable within the industry?
Well, once you get over a year, you're looking at people feeling like it's their permanent home and it's harder to move out. And that has been demonstrated in similar types of programs. Yeah.
So how many of your clients are meeting the 6 month range?
I don't have the statistics in front of me. I would have to look that up. But that was the average when we previously calculated average. It was an average of 6 months.
Is it safe to say then there are a number of your clients are well over the 6 months?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Terry, one thing to keep in mind, we haven't calculated the exact percentage, but we do have, on any 1 year we're seeing between 100 and 150 women. And so if the beds are 65, we're looking at probably 40 to 45% turnover. When you look at outcomes, that's pretty amazing as it relates, particularly when you think of the amount of trauma that women are experiencing once they come into the transitional living units. Some of the areas where Medora explained earlier that are more difficult are when increased traumas around mental health and addictions. Some individuals within the trans community, having a safe place to live while you're transitioning doesn't happen within a 6 month period. And so the women have been very successful who've come in and have actually been able to stay at the Y as they transitioned. And so it depends on the circumstance. That the women find themselves in.
I understand the multifaceted dynamics you're dealing with. I'm trying to understand, though, the transitional housing to me is a short period of time to transition them into sustainability and longer term. It's not about housing.
No.
So when we understand that, then I'm trying to understand what percentage of your clients are meeting the 6 month and how many of your clients are beyond the 11 month.
So 1/3 of our clients are beyond the 11 months. I'm saying that roughly because that was the last time I looked at the numbers. It was about 1/3 go beyond the 11 months. That could have changed, though, since then. That was about a year ago I looked at it.
And again, we talked about the mental health and some of the challenges you have with it. We also know that we have, I think it's 25%. I think it's 25% available beds in our residential care facilities around services and monitored heavily by city. Are they part of the solution in regards to the transition?
So the outcome is really based on the
would necessarily go to an RCF and they're independent living.
so of homelessness. And then the rest, the majority.
So I guess I was focusing on the third longer than the 11 months would be probably with people with addiction and mental health, people that you're looking or you're looking. I'm just trying to understand if you've got a mental
to do that. So mental health care as addiction support, and there are people who we take a harm reduction point of view, so they might be reducing their use so they can manage paying their rent. There's a whole, it's about women having the right to make choices and having a right to, people have a right to housing. It is a human right issue, and we're just trying to support them in accessing that.
Yeah, but we also want to make sure when they're in that independent housing that we're not taking up units that are, we got examples in Hamilton housing where mental health issues were never supported properly, appropriately, and now we got what is it? We got a percentage of units that are completely out of stock now, and people in need can't use them because they've been abandoned as a result of the inappropriate or not supportive supports.
So some of that is also the coordination with Housing First type programs like SOS.
Okay. So I'm trying to understand this. So 125,000 is a shortfall, and you indicate that this is primarily for additional staff person. So is that 125,000 for the staff?
No, it's not for an additional staff person. It's to support having 2 staff on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's not for additional. It's to keep the level of staffing. So it's to have the contributes to that.
So how many?
Yeah, it'd be about 4 FTE.
Questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to pass the chair to Councillor Johnson.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you very much. I certainly can comment on if you one-time transitional funding. In order for me to have complete, if you could just comment on CHIPI funding has affected your funding and identify any other programs you might have been successful in receiving CHIPI funding for.
So this is the only program we have with CHIPI funding, and it's really more the shift around HPS funding. There's flexibility that Jillian can explain better than I can, but there's flexibility around CHIPI. HPS had more stringent call for proposal in Hamilton, where there was strictness around not supporting transitional living and emergency shelters.
But if I could, for the sake of people present, can you just expand on HPS and who that is and who made that decision?
Yeah, so Homelessness Partnership Strategy. Yes, how the Homelessness Partnership Strategy, and that is the federal government. And so it was the previous federal government that had made a determination to focus. There's a heavy focus on housing first, and that certain percentage of the funding, and the others could go to homelessness prevention. And so we receive HPS allocation under the homelessness prevention, but we were limited in terms of the amount we could receive from that because of the amount that was available for homelessness prevention type programs. And then CHIPI has more flexibility and received the other part of it. And we're one of the few, I don't know, we might be the only, but a few programs where we receive both CHIPI and HPS currently, just to meet this $251,000.
And you fully recognize the CHIPI funding is allocated with HPS funding, very stringent, kind of, here's the budget, here's the direction we're going in, here are the programs as it's been recommended. So just through you, while you're here, before we get to staff, through you, Mr. Chair, what was your understanding when you received the one-time $60,000 allocation in December 2015?
So our understanding was that there was an understanding for a need for that money for our program, that we were short in our budget, that we would need that to support the 24/7 staffing, but that we knew there were no commitments to continuing to fund us. It was a one-time position the city could, and it was part of the transition related to transition dollars. Others had also received as they had reduced or lost funding through HPS.
And I'm sure, Denise, through you, Mr. Chair, you were present. You remember the rigorous conversation that we had here with the previous service provider. I'm just wondering if, recognizing that CHIPI has been allocated and HPS has stringent, so is the hope, is there space to continue that conversation and have this be directed to the budget process, where if there is a surplus or something like that, that we would look at how we might be able to identify agencies like yourself kind of on a surplus basis? And I'm thinking out loud here. I'm just, because what I don't want, Mr. Chair, is to have this presentation either way, right? Either way we don't win, in so much as that if we grant this request, then we're going to be going right back to the other service agencies that were here previously and explain to them where that money came from. And if we don't grant that request, then what I believe to be a very unique agency offering unique services to a very vulnerable group, could potentially be squeezed out for good. So I'm just wondering through you, Mr. Chair, is there openness? Have you been talking with staff about the possibility of what that might look like? And if you would just care to comment there so that we're not caught into a zero-sum conversation right now.
So I'm just going to add in clarity that the stringent requirements that left us out during the call for proposals and reduced our funding were changed by April. So April 2015, the federal government has changed its position on our transitional housing programs. And so we do have some latitude for some funding through HPS. But the thing is that the HPS call has been completed. Municipally, it's complete, the funding's allocated, but it's not that we don't fit the federal rules for some of the funding that we didn't have access to back in January.
So, Councillor Green, just further to what you had to say. So, yes, Council's been asked by a number of agencies who provide amazing services in this community, and like every community across this country, we have more need than dollars, and so I get that. And but as the CEO of this organization, I'd be remiss if I wasn't standing here saying we need your support. So, yes, are we working with staff? Yes, we work with staff. I'm very proud to say that we have a great working relationship with the team at the city, and sometimes I know their hands are tied too, but I do know that I think that they will continue to work with us to find every opportunity that if there is slippage within the budget, they know the bid wouldn't be here if we didn't feel this way. I'm also hopeful with the commitments of the federal government. They're actually talking about transitional living, which is something that I call the 10 dark years we didn't hear a lot about. So although I know that all of our problems aren't going to be solved in the federal budget, I am hopeful that we are going to start to see some investment, and particularly for women, because that hasn't always been the case as it related to this type of funding.
So yes, I can completely appreciate all that you've said through you, Mr. Chair, and certainly appreciate the working relationship you have with staff, because I also recognize the pressure that they're under. And so I guess I'll have to ask this question while you're here, and feel free to not swing at it if you want, but best case scenario, you give a request, we fund you right now, although based on what I've heard through budgets and the budgeting process, that's a challenge. Second best case scenario is that we move this back to staff to be able to continue that conversation, as you mentioned, and look for potential revenue streams that clearly up until December, I mean, we've been able to do something, right? And so we know that they're pretty good at that. Would it be your preference to continue the conversation or to just kind of all or nothing it right now?
I'm a reasonable person most times, Councillor. No, I think we should, and I also know that the Council has a lot of demands, and so I want to respect that. And so I would suggest that the YWCA continues to work with staff. And if miraculously the Council finds the $125,000, I wouldn't say no, but I respectfully say that we'll continue to work with Joanne and Jillian and the team in housing. They know our need, and I know they're going to look for ways to support us.
Through you, Mr. Chair, really appreciate your professionalism, and I say that because I'm new to this process, and it would have been very difficult for me with integrity to have this conversation now and support that than having the conversation we just had a short few weeks ago, given the stance that I took there. So I appreciate you continuing to work with staff. I'm also hopeful that through this budget process, looking through the operating budgets and the enhancements or whatever it is, that we might be able to work with our upper level approach. Because this, Mr. Chair, in my neighborhood, we have vulnerable people without supports. It doesn't work. It's not viable. It's not dignified, and I don't think that it's progressive. So I recognize that there needs to be the transition, as was identified through some of my colleagues here, where you have that wraparound support for vulnerable people, and it's not just day in, day out, 9 o'clock in the morning, get out of our facility and hit the streets type thing, where they are surrounded by a community, where they do have those supports. It's integral to people's success. And so I would like to see a shift in that direction, where if it does cost a little bit more over the longer term and we invest in people a little bit more, there's a higher success rate versus the turnstile that we seem to have in some of our shelters, which are emergency shelters and set up as such. But I just wanted to go on the record and say that I really do appreciate your openness to continue this conversation. And at the appropriate time, I'm happy to work with whatever members of council to put forward a motion that your program be given a consideration, if not a special consideration, given the squeezed position you're in, to find that type of support throughout the budget process. Those are my questions, Mr. Johnson. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you very much, Councillor Green. Councillor Farr indicated a desire to speak.
Councillor Farr, the floor is yours.
Thank you for your good questions, Chair. Just trying to get some clarity on one of the answers I heard from Madeira. So there was, sorry?
Medora.
April 2015, you said the feds changed their HPS and the funding. Funding has been allocated. Am I hearing you say that you'd applied, but in short, the feds didn't appeal to your request in April 2015?
No, so we applied back in December 2014. The decision we received came out from the city on January 2015. At that time, where the rule of 20, the HPS funding can support, more of the HPS funding could support transitional living. It was less strict than before. And so some of the rationale that the municipality had to use in their funding decision, had the feds changed their mind a little earlier, maybe we would have seen a different outcome.
Very helpful. Thank you.
The other thing you should know too is that under the Housing First model, YWCAs across the country and shelter programs have been advocating, because the Housing First model, it does not work necessarily for women, particularly those who are survivors of violence. And so we can send you that report. We won't go into it all today, but we don't believe that Housing First is the end all. Unfortunately, that's what we had to, those are the parameters we had to work within. But we've got, statistics that'll tell you work for women who are surviving health and addictions. So I can send you the report.
We have a motion to receive both. Denise, thank you guys so much for coming out and providing that full report. Moved by Councillor Farr, seconded by Councillor Partridge. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you. And so at this time, members of committee, I would like to open the floor and see if there's any direction that you would like to take. Sorry, Councillor Jackson. My apologies. Question. Thank you, Councillor Jackson. And for the record, I did not shut you down. You graciously allowed me to follow the procedure. Councillor Jackson, you have the floor, followed by Councillor Whitehead and anybody else who would like to ask. Councillor Farr. Okay, Councillor Jackson, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Now, formally and officially, through you to staff. So, first of all, on this slide here, someone help me. Is my mathematics off? If I add 60 to 251, I get 315. I know it's just $10,000, but it's $10,000. So, can somebody just help clarify that number for me, Mr. Chairman, through to Jillian?
Chair, I'll do my best. What we funded the YWCA for 2013-14 and 14-15 was approximately $250. But on top of that, and Medora could correct me, is that the amount of funding that you got through the SOS program?
Oh, the delegation's come and gone. We've officially received them, Jillian, so.
Sorry. Then I'm not 100% sure what the $305,000 is annually. I know it was $250. I know they also got funding for a staff person actually through the Good Shepherd SOS program. And so they were approved for the $251,000 again for a 4-year period with a combination of federal and provincial homelessness funding. And then when they approached us saying that they actually were experiencing a loss due to the reduction of funding through the SOS program and the changes to the federal funding, we approved the extra transitional funding in the amount of $60,000 on a one-time basis. So now they are back to the $251,000.
So I don't just add the 60 with the 251 to get 305. That's my mistake then, Jillian, Mr. Chairman, through you.
That was my understanding, Councillor Jackson.
Oh, so the 60 really has, okay, the 60 has nothing to do with the 251 to get to their annual amount there. It is my understanding that it was the 251 for the transitional program, plus they got staff through the Good Shepherd SOS program that added up to the 305. So your 60 that staff gave them is part of the 251?
That is on top of the 251.
Am I missing something, please? And I apologize if I'm slow with my math here.
And this is, you know, even when I read the report, this was one piece of it that was back and forth on. So and it was $250,000 is what Jillian is saying. Not, I don't know about the 305 where the other money came from. So for a year or two, we were giving the $250,000 towards the support of this program because of the concern about not having full-time staff, enough staff. Our hope, and it was just temporary money because we did not have a permanent funding source. So when we did the call for proposals with the combination of the federal and money, we saw that as an opportunity for the Y to potentially compete and get some permanent ongoing money for that program. So they competed in just finding money and giving them 200 years.
So far, so good. Carry on.
So then the Y they were getting from another program. Same as we gave the Good Shepherd. In a way, as a result of the call.
Top number should show interpreting, Joanne?
Yes.
Okay. For that explanation to you and Jillian. Thank you. On the other slide that has 25,000, back to that now. And Suzanne, just for the record, you're going to navigate
with Carmen to see what the submission is and to work through any of the
left off during the delegation.
Correct.
That at the time we said to staff.
That is correct.
So this would be in a similar type of vein of request where either additional funding request for a program or with the Good Shepherds, it was one time for several years that we suddenly put up a few little caution marks and said we should maybe be dealing with this in the context of the overall budget. Jillian, this kind of, it falls in that range, Mr. Chairman, through to Jillian, like Notre Dame did?
Through the chair, that is correct, Councillor. And so a report will be going to the February 12th GIC, including details of the Notre Dame request as well as the YWC request for the 125.
And so and that's this Friday when all enhancements and referrals, Mr. Chairman, will be dealt with by GIC for the 16 budget. So hypothetically, if they get the 125 approved this Friday, someone then will alert the City Enrichment Fund and the Grants Committee that the $75,000 in all likelihood will be withdrawn. Mr. Chairman, through you to Suzanne, or I'm just seeing some nodding
Through the
heads,
chair,
Jillian.
That is correct.
If they only get the 50,000 in option number 2, hypothetical, then obviously their 75 request will carry on through City Enrichment. Right, Suzanne?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's right.
Okay, and if they get none of the $125,000, obviously they're hoping for the 75, and they may end up being $50,000 short. I'm just doing all these plans, A, B, C, D's, hypotheticals, so that I'm clear on what's before me this coming Friday, Mr. Chairman. Through to staff for a final summation, please.
Through the chair, should the council not approve the 125 or the enrichment fund, we will continue to work with the YWCA to find alternate sources, and we will certainly continue to advocate to the provincial and federal government for an increase in that funding so that we can address requests such as this.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jillian. Thank you, staff, and thanks for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson, for your indulgence. We now have...
So when we work with the organization, I take it that we take a look at what's being asked for, how it's being spent, what percentage is going towards administration, what percentage is going towards other ancillary type cost. Have we had a chance to take a look at the particular ask, look at the budget, see if we can help, assist, facilitate any efficiencies that may not have been identified?
Through the chair, we certainly ask for the budget, and we do ensure that it is accurate and that the request that they're asking for is accurate, but I wouldn't, and we certainly encourage them, as the YWCA has, to look for alternate sources of funding, but I wouldn't go to the extent that we advise them around how to manage their budget.
Okay, so of this funding, what percentage goes towards administration?
Through the chair, I'm sorry, Councillor Whitehead, I don't have that information in front of me.
Okay. Those are all my questions.
Thank you very much, Councillor Whitehead. Councillor Farr, the floor is yours.
Many of my questions were answered through Councillor Jackson's line of questionings, but through you to Jillian, have staff considered this less strict rationale introduced in April 2015 by the feds as it relates to this case? And if you could speak to that from staff's perspective, that less strict rationale that was discussed by the delegates. Through you, Chair.
Through the chair, Majora was correct in that when we got the allocation of funding from the federal government to begin with, they were very strict, I would say, in their guidelines as far as funding transitional housing. That those guidelines have softened up, I would say, but by the time that we got this clarification from the federal government, we had completed the call for applications and the funding had actually been allocated. But we would certainly keep that in mind in the event of any slippage, that sort of scenario. But for the most part, the projects have been approved and allocated.
Through you, slippage. Sorry, help me out with that.
There is, upon occasion, for example, a project, usually time-limited project where the full amount of the funding that we have budgeted hasn't been spent. And so generally in a situation like that, we could reallocate it to another project who is potentially experiencing a pressure.
Through you, Chair, to Jillian, is had the feds worked a little more quickly to be less strict, the Y might have had a better opportunity at achieving their funding goals here. Through you.
Through the chair, I would say that they might have had that opportunity, but certainly taking into account that we received over $8 million in proposals and we were only able to approve $3.5 million, I would say that the potential's there, but there were certainly all sorts of excellent projects that we weren't able to fund.
Thank you very much, Councillor Farr. If I could pass the chair to Councillor Whitehead, I'd like to ask a few questions myself. So looking at this timeline, clearly there's been a huge shift in the mandate at the federal level of government. There have been statements made around massive investments in infrastructure. Social housing has been identified. Through you, Mr. Chair, to staff, how do you think you, but I'm going to ask for you
is going to be on, there's been a backlog of maintenance, so not new. Definitely in terms of infrastructure, in terms of what the priorities are, I can't get.
I say that boards, the biggest challenge for stay true to the mission, to not have mission drift and situation where there's a ripple and then brought back in. And not getting too far into the government for future plans, IWCA as it relates to increasing capital side of their programming, saying that if it's there, we try to make sure that we work within them, not drifting their mission, the mandate, and not getting left out, because I do believe housing with supports is an integral part. So those are that's my request. It's not a direction, it's just keep an open mind in that conversation when you're working with them, that if there is a capital side, a shovel-ready side, that they could also be involved there. So we have, I'll take the chair back. Second time speakers list. Did you want to go back on there, Cal? Okay, well then we'll defer to Councillor Farr and see what he has to say.
I'm just watching staff. I'm just wondering, maybe very generally through you to staff, if there's anything that maybe this hasn't addressed based on the delegate, what we've heard here today. Joanne, care to comment generally on this matter?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just a couple of things. One, and to the question that you asked Councillor Green about the infrastructure, one of the things that Jillian did have on, has got on her work plan that didn't come forward this year, in terms of capital required in our shelters and our other providers that we partner with. So that's still on our radar in terms of if we were to ask for next year in terms of what's our priority on a housing front. That is on the list in terms of capital infrastructure for shelters, et cetera, and opportunities like the Y. So that's not, so it is on our radar. In terms of what Julie and I have talked about and what we're going to work on, Councillor Farr, is a list of priorities that we're going to bring back to Council, similar to what you saw around the call for infrastructure money. Remember, we put all our recreation properties on there because, you know, for me, I like being transparent. So for us to arbitrarily pick the Y versus the Good Shepherd versus the Boys and Girls Club, I don't want to operate like that. So we're going to put together sort of a list in terms of some priorities that should there be gapping, as Jillian identified, or slippage or new money, that we have a list that's already approved by committee that says these are our priorities. That, you know, it could be the resource center, it could be this program from the Y, it could be something, you know, other programs that, as Jillian said, lots of programs that we're not able to fund. The Elizabeth Fry program, the pause for people, for their dogs to go so they can go into shelter, like a whole list of very valuable programs in this community. So we're going to work on that and bring it back to committee. So we've got a list, and committee can weigh in terms of the priorities. We can make some recommendations, and then as opportunities come up, we don't have to have this debate. We've got the list, and we can start to check things off.
And I'm not certain we need any other than direction, maybe not even that, if we're debating Friday. We have a delegate who is working closely with staff and told us so at the conclusion of the delegation. We know that this is a budgetary matter, and we know the date and time of the matter. So, I mean, we received the delegation. I think it's time to move on. I don't believe a motion or direction is even necessary. I believe, anyway.
Appreciate that. I do want to, though, just if I could pass the chair over, just for a little bit of clarity. Councillor Johnson, just so that we're not thinking that there's any kind of lack of transparency, if you could, did we not move a motion that created a short list for infrastructure projects just 1 or 2 meetings ago? For you? I seem to remember because I think I moved it.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So I know that the city, through the city manager's office, that we've been asked to put some projects on a list that's going to, yes,
no.
Or sorry.
Particular, I think there was some. There was a motion that happened with Indweld. My motion followed after that looked at potential federal funding, that looked at potential shovel-ready projects. I don't have it here before me, but I believe that passed already last committee meeting.
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Chair. So Julian has just reminded me, we're working on a roster that we're going to bring back. It's a report in terms of can we put, you know, provide, how do we establish a roster so that if we get any money from the federal government to build affordable housing, that we have the roster of people that have been sort of certified and ready to go in terms of building affordable housing. Is that the piece of work you're talking about?
That's exactly it. It was sitting in the back of my mind, Mr. Chair, through you to Joanne, when I was asking about the federal dollars. We've had so much happen since then. I had forgotten that direction was actually already in place, and so my comments regarding the WISE potential involvement in that stand. No need for direction. It's already a motion that's passed. You continue to work with staff, and I appreciate that. So, Councillor Johnson, I will take the chair back, and at the wise wisdom of Councillor Farr, failing any other questions, Councillor Whitehead.
Yeah, well, I was just going to formalize that because this is going in council in the budget process, just to reaffirm that it's in the budget process, 1, and 2, to provide direction with staff to continue working with the YWCA to find opportunities, efficiency, etc., to meet their needs in this year.
Okay. So we did cover off that a little bit in the last meeting in the motion, but to reaffirm the reaffirmation, we have Councillor Whitehead, seconded by Councillor Partridge. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Thank you very much to staff on that item, and to Denise and the delegates from the YWCA for bringing that forward today and informing us for Friday's budget presentation. We are now on to discussion items. Thank you. I recognize Councillor Marula.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, on this particular front, it's a discussion item that's ultimately related to the motion I'm bringing forward. Hence, I'll bring forward the motion accordingly. I'll move this and amend it via the motion, seconded by Councillor Jackson. I'll read the motion out.
Point 1, we have a motion
going forward
moved and amended as follows.
We'll do this later. So it's moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Jackson on item 8.1. I'll defer my comments until the motion.
Okay, so we have a motion carried, and now we have a motion. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Produce from the McQuestion Urban Farm. And whereas a single tender $108,061 used as a funding source to maintain the farm. I just want to applaud Pat Reed and the remainder of the McQuestion residents. It was about nearly 10 years ago when Pat sat me down and basically said, Sam, we have an idea. I think we need some sort of greenhouse or urban farm. And I basically said to her, okay, you had me at a hello, and let's start working on it. So in essence, that was the beginning of where we are today. We haven't built the greenhouse yet, but we're definitely got the farm. And it's one of the largest in Canada. And I must say that without council's support, it would not have been at this stage that it is today. So I must thank previous councils as well as this council. We've put in close to $400,000. This will bring it closer to 5 now, I believe. And in saying that, that entire area incorporates a fitness trail, the St. Helens Community Hub, which is part of the McQuestion Hub team that has a food bank and a seniors program, which also plays a part in this particular farm. Years ago, we used to have kids from the inner city travel to Flamborough and Waterdown to tour farms. Now they have one right in their neighborhood, and that's something that I think I know I don't take for granted, but I think the vast majority of people who don't understand the development of this program and the outreach to another very happy ending to the Ottawa Street Farmers Market, which was at its last legs when it was at the Centre Mall. We were able to, as a result of council support, revive it, and it was the first farmers market within the city, or the rural area, urban area, and as a result, it has been successful since then. In conclusion, I do want to also thank staff. We've really collectively with council and community come a long way in addressing these types of issues. It basically meets the grade environmentally, socially, and financial, and it's really nice to see when you have community, staff, and council all singing off the same song sheet. And for that, I just want to commend everyone involved. Thank you.
Councilor Marula, great quote from Jerry Maguire. You had me at hello, followed by show me the money. So good on you. We have a motion on the floor. Would anybody like to comment on the motion? If I could pass the chair to Councillor Johnson, I think, and I shared this through you, Councillor Johnson, to Councillor Marula, but I think is one of the true highlights of this program. If I could just through you to staff, if you could just highlight, summarize some of the ways that this program's been leveraged with other funding sources. I think it's very unique in terms of not just the volunteers, but other funders.
Through you, Mr. Acting Chair, to the Chair, this program has been funded, as you know, through the Neighborhood Action Strategy capital money, but also has leveraged money from the Hutton family through the Hamilton Community Foundation at $43,000, TD Friends of the Environment at $5,000, the Hamilton Industrial Environment Association at 10, and again at 5 this year, 10 last year, 5 this year. Entries for Hamilton have donated $4,000 in trees as well. So our total grants and donations, a total of $62,800 so far. And the interest in the farm continues to grow, and we continue questions also, and the private sector. So we're that will continue to grow.
Philanthropy is right now. This program is how much have bought in. So hats off to all those involved. I think it's a great model moving forward in that really, in so many ways, and even just fantastic. So hats off to all those involved. So if there's no other questions or comments on that motion, all those in favor? Carried. That's quick. We have Councilor Marula again on item.
We have a up to the plate and the additional costs. Could you just elaborate on that impact and how this might assist in helping?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So this is the report that deals with the implementation of the provincial computer system for OW SAMS. The province has given us approximately $550,000 to assist in the transition. So far, it's cost about $1.3 million. If you would consider that they're going to pay for half of it because they pay for half of the cost of administration, but we're still short. We're still short at least $400,000 in terms of costs, and that's just costs up to this date. We see that those costs are likely going to continue for at least a year, so it continues to grow. And to this point, the province has refused to offer us any additional money beyond what they've given us to this point. So we're not aware of yet, which because we haven't gotten good reporting systems as part of that system, is in terms of the number of overpayments potentially. We're not sure when we do our claims at the end of the year how much the province really owes us. Okay. We don't know about their, our caseload, whether it's increasing. So there's impacts that we have not fully realized as well.
Okay, so through you, Mr. Chairman, I think would it not be advisable then that we include as an amendment, capture that particular potential future cost and ask of the province as well today?
Through you, but the report says that we don't know how much it is, and that's why we haven't quantified it, the exact number and the recommendation, because we're not sure, so that we just are saying that whatever the costs are, that they pay for them.
Need to be more aggressive.
I'm happy to learn from your scars. So are there any
as costs continue to additional costs?
We're going to go ahead and switch it up. Report regarding
of hundreds of thousands to a mere Very quick. It's book yes, that we don't care. It's under you for repair through you, and quite simply, this piece says.
Councillor Johnson. This advisory committee budgets.
Attitude because it's involving the seniors and their budget and the ones who serve on it. Denis, where does the interview process stand, please?
Okay, so I'll provide a little update with the Citizen Advisory Committee recruitment process. Where we currently are, the deadline, as you'll know, closed on January 7th of 2000. Process for member selection for vacancies on approximately your advisory committee portfolio. Depending on how these meetings go, we for late March to early April, keeping in mind that final council, once the process is complete, whether successful or not.
Apply and answer was germane to your advisory committees. I know my waiting and beta together of our business we appoint to seniors. So to do some interviews. Mr. Chairman, through to Denis for a closing comment.
Correct, and I'd just like to say at this time I've been taking any inquiries with respect to, I've received a lot of updates, when will the process complete, etc. So I've been handling those, and we are moving as fast as we can, given the nature.
Thank you, Denis, and hopefully this will be the last time, Mr. Chairman, it gets into the second year of wanting to appoint all the eagerness and desires of our citizens to serve. I'll move this recommendation for the budget at the appropriate time. Thank you.
We have a motion moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Farr. All those in favor? Carried. Excellent. Now on to motions. We have one motion before us today that's already moved. Excellent. That worked out really well. Are there any notice of motion today? Seeing as that there is none, may I please have a motion to adjourn, moved by Councillor Partridge, seconded by Councillor Whitehead. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you very much to all of you, to Denis, media present, and staff. Have a wonderful day.